Hello, my Morning Star family. This is Reverend Cherie Jones, and I am joining you for our midweek meditation. I don't know about you, but last Sunday's message was so impactful. I think Pastor did such a phenomenal job of preaching on a topic that we all can benefit from, no matter how young or old you are. All of us need to know how to handle conflict. And that was the main theme of Pastor's sermon. He is in this great preaching series called I Want to Be Great. And the thought for episode 5 was, can't we all just get along? And I just want, if you were blessed by last Sunday's message, I want you to say so in the comments. Say something that stood out to you about that message. But I think it was so on time. Um, in the world that we're living in right now, we all need to know how to handle conflict responsibly. And so I invite you to turn with me to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, verses 15 through 17. Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 through 17. And I will be reading from the New Revised Standard Version. And it reads, if another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take one or two others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of two or three witnesses. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile or a tax collector. This ends the reading of God's word. We're asking God that you will bless this learning hour. God, illuminate your word so that we might be able to see it clearly and know how we are to apply it to our daily lives. And so let's get into this for just a few minutes. I want to be great. Right? That's the overarching theme of this sermon series for Pastor Jones. And you might ask yourself, what does handling conflict have to do with greatness? And it has everything to do with greatness. It is essential. As a matter of fact, Pastor said that greatness can be seen in how we handle conflict responsibly. That is a sign of greatness. If you know how to handle conflict responsibly, that is a sign of greatness, right? It's not about the titles you have. That's not greatness. Really, our behavior, our integrity, of how we carry ourselves, our deportment, the words that we use. Those are some things that give people an indication of who we are truly, right? It's not about the externalities. And so here today in Matthew chapter 18, Jesus talks about how to handle conflict. And Pastor Jones made a good point of saying that even though in the text is translated in verse 15, it says, if another member of the church sins against you, right? It says if, almost like there's a possibility that it won't happen. But what we realize is that conflict is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. Because all of us can think of a time when we found ourselves in some form of conflict with another person. And it could be something as simple as a difference of opinion on something. It could be something even more dynamic where a person just genuinely doesn't like you and is seeking to sabotage you in some way, right? There's a spectrum of in terms of conflict, and we have conflicts even as children, right? And we have to learn how to handle conflict. It could be kids on the playground and someone snatches a ball out of another kid's hand because they want to play with the ball. How do you handle that? As a kid who had the ball snatched out their hand, are they going to start fighting because the ball was taken from them? Are they going to go to an adult and say, listen, this person took the ball from me? How are you going to manage conflict? This is a life skill that we all have to master, and we're required to do it. We're called upon to do it as early as our formative years, right? And so this is an important message. I thought it was such a timely sermon that Pastor Jones gave us, because many of us, and I wonder how many of you out there right now would raise your hand and say, yeah, I'm in the midst of a conflict right now. And so this sermon series is right on time, particularly as we think about the world we're living in right now, and seeing that come January, we will have a new president who oftentimes does not seek the higher ground, but, chooses to go low when everyone else wants to be high. And so I think this is a good time for us to look at and prepare ourselves for those times in our life where we will find ourselves embroiled in a conflict. So just for a few minutes, I want to just highlight some of the things that was discussed on Sunday. And so one thing is that Pastor Jones said that with conflict is really, why do we have, before you can even start to resolve conflict, you first need to understand the nature of conflict, right? So you got to get to the root of it. And conflict, he said, we have conflict because all of us have different personalities, priorities, perceptions, and preferences. And then I added on there, I said, I thought we also have different perspectives, right? So he said different perceptions or different perspectives, right? So all these P's, but these are just different ways in which we may find ourselves in conflict, because one thing we know is that personality clashes can cause conflict. If there's a person who is more boisterous, more extroverted, more aggressive, and they have to work with a person who might be a bit more introverted, maybe more laid back, more reserved. And so oftentimes personalities, because people are not of the same personality, there could be conflict. But even if you have the same type of personality, oftentimes you have two hotheads, that can also be cause for conflict. But then we also have priorities, right? So all of us have our own value system. And so we can't think that because what is of value to me, and if you don't have those same values, it makes you less than, right? I shouldn't think less of you. I shouldn't have any kind of critique of you because our value system, our priorities are different. And then he said there are different perceptions, right? Different, or I would say even perspective. So we see things differently. We perceive things differently. And so oftentimes I think perception is normally what leads to conflict, right? Because we see there could be, you can send someone a text message, and I think miscommunication is a part of that perception piece. You can send someone a text message, and with anything that's written, we kind of have to add our own intonation to it, right? And so we can read something that someone has sent to us and have a misconception of what it is they meant. We can perceive that they said it in a certain way and they may have meant it in another way, right? And so perception can also, a difference of perception can cause conflict. And then he also said preferences, right? And so I loved his example. We're talking about, we all have our preferences, right? How we like certain things, how we like certain people. Everybody got their type of person whom they're attracted to. Everybody has their preference for how they like to eat their food, how they like to wear their clothes, how, all these different things. We all have our preferences, right? But guess what? Just because someone has a different preference than me, it doesn't mean it has to be this big deal. It's like, listen, you like it, I love it. Right? And so everything doesn't have to be cause for conflict because we have difference of opinion. We have different preferences, different priorities, different perceptions, and different personalities. But what is important is that we learn to handle those conflicts responsibly. And I believe that part of conflict resolution, and this has been my experience with having to resolve conflict in my years of doing youth ministry in so many capacities, oftentimes miscommunication or lack thereof is at the heart of some conflicts, right? And so we have to be willing to have the difficult conversations if we really seek to resolve a conflict. Now, if you like mess and you like drama and you like stirring the pot, then you're not a person who seeks to resolve conflict. You're a person who likes to keep conflict going, right? But Jesus is calling us to a higher standard. He's calling us to a higher standard and saying, when conflict happens, you have to be responsible. You have to go high when they go low. You have to seek resolution. How do I know that? Because in verse 15, he says, if another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault with the two of you alone. So first you handle it one-on-one, right? Just verse 15 puts so much pressure on us as Christians, but it lets us know where Jesus' heart is at, right? Jesus' heart is at a place where it's like we're not going to allow conflict to thrive in our community. And so that could be in the church, it could be in your family, it could be in your workplace. You cannot allow conflict to take root and thrive in any healthy, and if you seek to have a healthy environment, you cannot allow conflict to reside there, right? And so what he is saying in verse 15 is, even though you were the one who was offended, you have the responsibility to go to the person, to the offender, and seek resolution. And some people are like, that's not fair. It's not fair because they are the one who did the wrong thing, right? And so the onus of responsibility, you would think, would be on that person who did the offense. Now, logically and reasonably, it would make sense that, yeah, the person who did the wrong should be the one to initiate the resolution. But what we do know is oftentimes the person who may be the offender, it could be they don't know. They didn't realize that they offended you. So if you feel offended, then you need to speak up and say something, right? So a lot of times people like to just sit and sulk and marinate in their feelings. They want to be in their feelings and be upset about what so-and-so said to me or what they did or what they didn't do, as opposed to going to the person and saying, hey, listen, what you said really kind of offended me. And I want us to, I don't want there to be any ill will. And I just need to, share that with you so we can move past it. So I can move past it, but I can't if I just hold on to it. So I wanted to have this conversation with you. Right. And so it's our responsibility, even though we were the one who was offended. If you're sitting there waiting on someone to come and apologize, you'll be waiting all day. And so if you recognize that there was an offense, then you need to go and settle it. Now, there are sometimes people, they know exactly what they did and they just don't care. Right. But still, it's our responsibility. And for me, and this is not in the Bible, but for me, I believe the other reason is because when a person does wrong, they should be called out on it. Because if they're never challenged on their poor behavior, then it encourages them to continue to behave in that way. And so it's our responsibility when we recognize wrong that we seek to right the wrong, right? We seek to correct the bad behavior. And so here in this text, Jesus is really calling us to a higher standard, that we have to seek resolution. We can't allow conflict, because what we know, if you allow conflict to thrive, it'll just mushroom into something big and ugly, and an issue that was so small, which could have been handled when it was minor. Now you've let weeks and months, sometimes even years, go by. And now this little thing has mushroomed into this huge thing that it didn't have to be. And so in your classes today, we are encouraging you to really take a close look at this text. And verse 15 has so much in it. Just the first verse of this passage has so much for us to really explore and really think about. Do we ever use this in our real lives when we find ourselves in conflict? Do you ever go to the person first, one-on-one, and say how you feel? Is that your first reaction when you find yourself in conflict? Or do you go and gossip about it? Or do you go and sulk in the corner and lick your wounds and just be mad and make a decision that I'm just not going to speak to that person anymore. I'm just not going to deal with them anymore. That is really immature. It's immature behavior. And so if we are seeking to grow in our spirituality, to grow spiritually, right? We want to be mature Christians. We don't want to always be on milk. At some point, we want to eat solid foods. And so if you want to be, spiritually mature, then you have to act like an adult and you have to deal with conflict in a responsible way. And I will say lastly, it's not only about what you do, it's how you do it, right? And I mean, we've heard this time and time again. It's not only what you say, it's how you say it, right? And so we are all seeking to be great in some capacity. We want to grow in our relationship with God. We want to grow spiritually. We want to we're asking God to enlarge our territory, give us more responsibility, all these things. If you're seeking to have more of an abundant life, with that comes responsibilities. And in the midst of that, there's going to be some conflict. There's going to be some difference of opinions. You're going to have to encounter people who are not like you, who may have a different background than you, who may have a different value system than you. And how are you going to handle those relationships? How are you going to handle those difference of opinions, those conflicts when they arise? How are you going to mediate conflicts when it happens at your job or in your family or in your church? We have to seek resolution. We cannot be satisfied with just letting things just go. Like, I'm just going to go with the flow, whatever. It'll be what it'll be. No, we can't stick our head in the sand and hope that the problem will resolve itself. At some point, we have to be courageous and mature and responsible enough to handle the conflict. And so I encourage you all have a great, this should be a really great conversation in Bible study. And Pastor only dealt with one of his 3 points on Sunday because he was talking about, he said, before we can get to a potential fix for conflict, we must first understand the nature of conflict and how we see it. And so his first point was conflict is inevitable, right? So that's what we were talking about already. It's not a matter of if you have conflict, it's a matter of when. And so in your classes, dig into that, the inevitability of conflict. And then the next time Pastor preaches, he'll be looking at the fact that conflict must be faced And conflict can be beneficial. I can't wait to get to that third one. I want to understand why and how conflict can be beneficial. But for right now, this is look at the inevitability of conflict. That should be a really great conversation. You all have a great evening. I can't wait to see you on Sunday. Love you.